Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our Data Backup and Protecting Your Construction Data webinar. My name is Jerry Friedman from Colden Company. I'm our Senior Sales Representative. With me is Jim LaPointe and Jim Collins from Constructive Solutions. This is the second in a series of 3 webinars, and we hope that you're getting a lot out of them. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Collins to say a few words, but just a little housekeeping first. We are recording this, and we will make the recording available. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we do want your feedback, so please give us your questions via the chat or Q&A boxes that you'll find at the top of your screen. Mr. Collins, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jerry, for the introduction and getting us started here. I'd like to thank Jerry and Jim for putting this presentation on for us. Over the past month or so, we've had our first webinar on IT topics, and this is the second, as Jerry mentioned, in the series. We will have another one coming out at the end of September. Jerry and Jim and I have put this series together geared specifically to our Computerease clients that we service. These are topics that are of interest to our clients as in regards to IT topics. So things like virus protection, data backup, managed services, making sure that your computer environment is set up and running properly to support the Computerease application. Over the last year and a half, we've had several instances of clients that use Computerease that we support directly having different IT issues. Sometimes, they'll have a hard disk fail and want to go back to a backup and not have an appropriate backup. We have had instances of clients of ours getting hit with a ransomware virus or other viruses because they weren't properly protected. So, these issues, while not directly related to the Computerease application, are important for all Computerease users to consider. So we're very excited today and pleased to be able to present a topic about data backup and making sure that you consider certain things as you think about your environment and making sure that you are properly protected in the event of any kind of hardware failure or virus or things like that. So with that, I'll turn it over to the experts and let Jim give you the presentation today. As Jerry mentioned, you're all in mute mode right now, listen-only mode. Certainly at the end of the conversation, Jim and Jerry can open it up either through the chat window to take any direct questions that you may have, or we'll certainly get back to you with any questions that you may have and follow up on that. So with that, thank you very much for attending today. We look forward to trying to address all your needs, and certainly with that, I'll turn it over to Jim LaPointe from Colden Company.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. I'm actually going to turn it over to Jerry here for a little bit of an intro, and we'll get started here.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you both, Jims. A little bit about us, and through the course of this presentation, we'll also be putting up some poll questions. We'd like your feedback, so when you see those, just take a moment to respond to those if you would. Colden Company is an information technology service organization. We are celebrating our just past our 13th birthday. We have offices in Ballston Spa, New York, and down in St. Augustine, Florida. We have a pretty big footprint for a relatively small company. We service customers in 21 states, provinces of Canada, and as well as Bermuda. And we do believe in keeping current and on top of the changing environment, so we do carry a lot of leading technical certifications. For the purposes of this discussion, our Certified Business Continuity Planners certification really comes into play. That means that we have been, and Jim LaPointe specifically, has been trained in dealing with disaster recovery from prevention to through the whole recovery process. We're going to focus on the data portion of that. Okay, so what do we do? In short, we protect business-critical data. We work with a large number of customers throughout North America, and we are kind of different than your local IT company. We do specialize in the construction and the HVAC trades, so we have a greater sense of what challenges construction businesses face as opposed to, say, lawyers or accountants. And you know, having been around for a long time, we do speak your language. What are we going to talk about today? First off, we're going to define what constitutes a disaster. What does a disaster cost you in terms of dollars and cents? How are we going to evaluate those risks? And after we cover all that, we're going to talk about how we can help you. And then, as was well mentioned before, we will have a Q&A session at the end. Okay.
Let's do our first poll question here.
Okay.
I'm going to open this up here. First poll question is, what are you using today for backup?
And if you're not sure what some of those things are, you'll learn about them through the course of the webinar.
Okay, we are getting some responses here. Looks like quite a variety. The only one on the list that has, I guess, has the most responses now would be external hard drive. That's good to know. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and open a second question here. And that one would be to rate how confident you are in the backup solution that you're using today. Okay, looking at the responses there, the somewhat confident responses seems to be getting the most choices here. I'll go ahead and close that poll as well and move on in our presentation.
All right, so now let's talk about what constitutes a disaster. Disasters can be broken down into two basic categories: natural disasters, which is what a lot of the advertisements for a lot of the backup and disaster recovery things focus on, which would be, you know, fire, flood. For those of you out in the Buffalo area, you're well familiar with the snow and ice. And this time of year, tornadoes and hurricanes are prevalent. And man-made disasters, which would really constitute human error. And, you know, since this is the world that we live in these days, you know, terrorism is a factor as well. What we're going to focus on is protecting against data loss. So let's take a look at what the causes of data loss are. If you take a quick look at this pie chart, you'll see that hardware malfunction and human error account for over 75% of your data loss. Software corruption is about another 14%. Natural disasters is actually a very small portion. And for those of you that were on our ransomware webinar last month, you will know that we talked about computer viruses, specifically the ransomware, is becoming much more virulent, much more prevalent, and much more destructive. So that 7% has probably risen over the past year or so. This is a study that is about 2 years old. So what we really want to concentrate on is, you know, the big chunk of the loss, human error, and hardware malfunction, as well as the software corruption, that's where you really want to concentrate your efforts. But we absolutely have to take into account viruses as well. So a lot of people think downtime is strictly an IT function. I'm going to get my IT guy on the phone or get the guy in the office to take care of it. But it's actually a business concern, because if your computers, your network isn't up and running, in a lot of cases, you guys aren't working. And if you imagine if you didn't have access to your receivables or your payables for a long time, what kind of impact that has on your business. There's a very simple calculation on what downtime costs your business. If you take your revenue and your wage bill and you break that down to an hourly basis, and you multiply that by the amount of time that you're down, that is what an hour of downtime costs your company. We get a lot of people that just don't know what that number is, and it's very hard for them to grasp how expensive downtime really is for them. Gartner has a study that says that the average mid-sized company has somewhere between 16 to 20 hours of downtime on network systems or applications per year. If your business is subject to any compliance regulations like HIPAA, you're required to have data backup and a data recovery plan. Many cyber insurance policies also require some sort of backup plan. But for you guys, more important may be the union payrolls. If you are aware of what those penalties are for missing a payroll, you can see that having access to your data at all times is crucial. So if you do have a data loss, what does it take in terms of dollars, for recreating 20 megabytes of data? Now, for reference, 20 megabytes of data is roughly somewhere between 5 and 6 songs that you might have on your computer or on your phone. So you can see that it's really not a tremendously large file. Sales data is going to cost you approximately $17,000. Accounting data can cost you $19,000. Engineering data, if you have blueprints, plans, things like that, to recreate that can be up to $98,000. And they can't even put a number on medical data because there's so many variables. And this is based off of a National Computer Security Association study. And in addition to this, if you had to send your hard drive out for forensic recovery, the price for that starts in the thousands of dollars on the hope that they're able to recover data. So this is, again, really illustrating why it's crucial to have good backups. Small to mid-sized businesses are at a greater risk than some of the larger companies because they have fewer resources to prevent data disaster. Many of you guys don't have dedicated IT staff, and it's not a large staff if you do. You have limited resources to combat disasters. You can't afford to be not producing revenue, and that data, as we showed, is very valuable. And one thing that a lot of people also don't take into account is the negative impact on your reputation when a data breach occurs. There are a lot of large data breaches that have occurred over the past years, Home Depot, Sony, Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield most recently, that are big names. But if you're working in a smaller space and you have a lot of competition doing what you do, that negative impact could actually cost you a lot of money. You know, customers may be wary of doing business with you. They don't want their data exposed in another breach. So that is something that is a big concern for many customers. Statistically speaking, now, what's your risk? Well, 25% of computers are going to fail this year. That is just a fact. Hard drives fail, as we saw. Malfunctions and software corruption play a large portion in where the data loss is. 24% of companies say they've experienced a full data disaster. And again, going back to the discussion that we had at the ransomware webinar, since 2010, there have been over 49 million new strains of malware, and that number just keeps growing and growing. And as we said, that malware is becoming much more destructive. So PricewaterhouseCoopers has done a study that says 70% of small businesses that experience a major data loss go out of business within a year. And our goal is to keep you on the better side of that statistic. You want to be in the 30% that doesn't go out of business, and ideally we want to prevent you from having a data loss in the first place. As contractors, I'm sure you all carry a fair amount of insurance for your employees, for your job sites, for your equipment, for your businesses. But why aren't you considering some sort of insurance for your business data? Because odds are that you're going to use your backup solution before you're going to use your insurance. So as we go on with the presentation and Jim takes over and is talking about your options, consider data backup as a valuable insurance for your business. Jim, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerry. When we're talking about evaluating risk, there's a couple of terms that I want to define for us. It's something that we ask all of our customers to spend a little bit of time on. And the first one is to determine what their recovery time objective is. So what is recovery time objective? Essentially, it's how long can you be without your critical data. So let's take an example. If you were to have some sort of a disaster on a Monday night, as an example, are you okay with being down all day Tuesday? Are you okay with being back up on Wednesday? Can you be down for a week? What is that time frame that you can be without your data? And also keep in mind that you can have different recovery time objectives for different systems. So you may have a payroll system that is more critical, and you'll have a smaller recovery time objective than for maybe a different system that you don't need to access that data quite as frequently. But you do want to take a look at that and determine how long can you be without that data. The second term is your recovery point objective. And what that means is you're defining your critical data and how much can you afford to lose. So now from that disaster, again, let's say we've had that disaster on a Monday night, are you okay with going back to Friday night's backup to recover? Are you a hospital where you need to have a much smaller window where you can only lose a few minutes of data? Are you okay with going back a week? So the recovery time objective looks forward from the disaster of when you're going to be back up. The recovery point objective looks backwards from the disaster. Where are you going to recover to? So those are two terms that we like to define because it will help you in evaluating your backup solutions. Do my backup solutions meet these objectives? And I'm going to tell you a quick story here. I was working with a construction company in the Albany area, and I sat down with the business owner and asked them these very questions. What is your recovery time objective? And he was kind of an old school guy and said, I'm a paper and pen kind of guy. I've got my phone. I don't really need my computer system that badly. I can be without it for a month. So my recovery time objective is going to be 1 month. Fair enough. I went and sat down with the office manager, who's also the accountant, and asked her the same question and let her know that Tom, the owner, said that he could be without the computer systems for a month. I can't repeat the words that she said when I told her that he said he'd be okay without the systems for a month, but let's just say that she had a very different opinion. Because she's the one that had to get that union payroll out. She's the one that had to get the bills out and keep the business running. They ended up settling on a 48-hour recovery time objective. But the point in bringing that story to you is that you want to get feedback from different parts of your organization. Don't just rely on one person to give you those answers. Get feedback from different areas, and as a group, come up with what a realistic recovery time objective and recovery point objective are. Okay, once we've defined that, then you want to take a look at your plans. What have we got in place here for recovery? And how does that compare to those objectives that I just laid out? You want to compare your success and failure rates when you're doing test restores and evaluate the plan that you currently have as a whole here. So when we talk about comparing success and failure rates, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And bear with me here. I've got kind of an unnamed graphic here where on one side we've got something in blue that is 60% of the time and something in red that is 40% of the time. What is this? Well, it was the percentage of people that chose Pepsi over Coke in a blind taste test. I'm going somewhere with this, so bear with me. Now the next slide here, we've got 58% on blue and 42%. So this one is a little bit closer to 50-50. The Coke Pepsi, which I guess I would suspect would be pretty much a 50-50 split. This one's even closer to that, where we've got 58% on one side, 42 on the other. What is this? It's the percentage of tape-based restores that are successful versus unsuccessful according to a study from Microsoft. So I know some of you are using tape backup. We saw that in the beginning poll here. This graphic should make you sweat a little bit. And when I first saw this, frankly, I didn't believe the statistic. But after thinking about it, I do, and I want to tell you why. Number one is tape-based technologies did not become the industry standard because it was the most reliable. That's not the reason. The reason it became a standard was because it was cheap and it was easy. But tape technology is wrought with technical problems. The tape that's spooled around inside the tape there on the spool, as it sits and ages, it slowly unwinds. That tape head is consistently sliding across a piece of metal in the tape drive, the tape head, and can wear grooves into that tape head to the point where you end up with a combination where a particular tape and a particular tape drive are both grooved to the point where they're the only two compatible pieces. So if your tape drive dies, you get a new tape drive, all of a sudden you can't read all of your old backup tapes. So there's just been a lot of technical problems with tape-based backups that make it unreliable. And that's why the industry has really been moving away from tape over the last 5 years or so. The other reason why I believe the statistic is businesses almost never test full system recovery from tape. And the reason businesses don't test that is because you could potentially create a disaster if your tape-based restore doesn't work properly. So you've got a server, you're backing it up to tape, and you go ahead and try to restore the operating system from tape and it doesn't work. Well, now you've just created your own disaster, right? So consequently, businesses just don't test that. There's just too much risk involved in doing that type of a test. So when you have a disaster and you need that type of restore, you really don't know if it's going to work for you because it's really never been tested. So those are two of the primary reasons why I do believe the statistic from Microsoft that tape-based restorers don't always work. It's not the best technology out there. There are better ways. So talking about choosing the right backup tool, there's a bunch of things to consider. You want to consider the security of your solution. Particularly if you're doing some type of cloud backup, you definitely want to make sure there's encryption involved. And it's not enough for your vendor to say, yes, we're using encryption. There are multiple ways encryption can be used. The term that you're looking for is you want what's called end-to-end encryption. So let's take your computer-use data as an example here. You want that data to be encrypted before it's sent over the wire. You want it to be encrypted in transit as it's being sent to the remote server. And you want that data to be encrypted at rest while it's sitting at the the cloud server. There's some commercial grade solutions that claim to have encryption, and they do. They'll encrypt your data in transit, but then it sits there in their servers in an unencrypted format. So if they have any type of a data breach, your data is susceptible. So you want to dig into the encryption, particularly when we're talking about cloud solutions. You also want to consider what the retention policy is for whatever backup solution you're using, and what that means is how far back do your backups go? Are you keeping a 1-week tape rotation? Do you have a month worth of rotation? How far back can you go if you need to restore? And this can be important if you need to go back and look at data from an old job as an example. Number of copies of your backups is something to look at. Whether or not that backup is automated or verified. Is it something that you as the end user are responsible for? And the example that I like to use is consumer grade solutions like Carbonite as an example. Just last week, we picked up a new customer. They were using Carbonite. I looked at her computer, and it hadn't backed up in 267 days. And that's not Carbonite's fault. That is the end user's fault. They are responsible for making sure that works. There's nobody looking out for you with those commercial grade or consumer grade services. So we recommend more business grade solutions where those backups are both automated and verified by someone to make sure that they're working. You also want to look at ease of restoration. Again, particularly with cloud services, cloud backup services, what happens when you have that disaster and you need to get that data back? Is it a situation where you have to download your data, where if you've got lots of data, you're going to be sitting there for a week watching your files download? Or is there some easier, better way to get your data back to you in a disaster? Of course, you want to look at the pricing structure, make sure you fully understand what it is you're paying for. Are you paying a monthly fee? Is it a one-time price? Are you paying by the megabyte like you might do for some cloud services? You know, the expression that we have, which I always get a chuckle about, is if you're paying by the megabyte, it's like paying for a bowl of cereal by the Cheerio. That can change from morning to morning, and your pricing structure is not going to be consistent. Of course, you want to look at the service and support behind the solution, and you want to look at whether or not a solution is local, is it in the cloud, or is it some type of hybrid solution. Okay, so these next two slides, we're going to talk about generally types of backups. And on one side here, we have what are called file level backups, and one is called image level. The typical file and folder level backup is where you are selecting what files you want to back up. So you're going to select your computer use folder as an example and say, I want this to back up. In general, you're not backing up operating systems or system settings or things like that with a file level backup. And that's where the image level backup differs. An image level backup is backing up at an entirely different level. It's backing up at a very low level. Computers and hard drives in particular store data in terms of ones and zeros. They're binary, right? And that's the level that we're talking about here. It's looking at those ones and zeros on those different sectors on the hard drive and backing up at that very, very low level. So consequently, really what you're doing is you're making an exact copy of your system. It's getting all of the operating system, it's getting all the settings, it's getting the IP address, it's an exact copy of your system. That's going to give you faster full system recovery. So if you do have a complete failure of that system, you've got everything backed up. Whereas with the file level backup, you need to recover the hardware, reload the operating system, and then your applications and then put your data back on top. So it's a little bit longer of a recovery time for a file level backup. With the image level, we're mentioned here that there's what's called a larger seed backup. As you can imagine, since it is a full backup and it's backing up the whole system, that initial backup is going to be a lot larger because it's getting your whole system. But once that initial seed backup, as it's called, is done, then what you do is you make a backup that just gets the changes. Those are called differential or incremental backups. And those go very, very fast. And that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is why is that faster with an image level backup than it would be with a file level? So I'll explain that briefly here. Let's say I were to make a change to this presentation here. I want to change that word differential to incremental on this slide. With the typical file and folder level backup that's looking to backup changes, it's going to say, oh, I see that Jim just changed this PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to back that file up. And that may be a 5 megabyte file. So I'm going to put 5 megabytes onto my backup medium when I do my backup. With the image level backup, because it's not looking at it in that way, it's looking at it at that ones and zeros level, there's only a few ones and zeros that actually changed on the hard drive because all I did was change one word. And that's all that's going to get backed up. I might be backing up a kilobyte or two. It might be in the order of magnitude of thousands of times smaller than the same incremental backup that a file and folder level backup will do. Generally speaking, this last bullet point is file level backups tend to be a little bit lower cost, which is always important to know. Okay, actually, before I move on to this slide, I'm actually going to put up a third poll question here. What do you think is a preferred backup? Are image level backups or file level backups preferred? If we're going to make a recommendation to you, what do you think we're going to recommend? Go ahead and answer that for me. Okay, so we've got good answers. No one selected file level, which is good. In general, from a technology perspective, image level backups are superior. There's just no doubt about that. The reason it depends is an acceptable answer is you have to take more than technology into consideration. You have to take into consideration budget, costs. There's other things to consider other than technology. So from a pure technology perspective, yes, image level backups are what we're going to prefer, but it depends is also an acceptable answer. Okay, I'm going to close that poll. And move on to local versus cloud backup here. With a local backup, generally you're going to have a smaller backup window. And the reason for that is because you're backing up to some type of either device on your local area network or a directly connected device where there's high-speed communication between the two. Whereas with a cloud backup, you're going off-site. That data has to go over your internet connection, which generally is going to be a smaller pipeline or smaller bandwidth than you're going to have with your local backup. Now, obviously, the risk with a local backup is if you have a site disaster, your backup is on site. It's going to go away with your data. So you're losing your data and the backup as well. You're susceptible to ransomware attacks. Those of you that attended our last session know this already. But if your backup is either a flash drive or an external hard drive, the way ransomware viruses work, if you contract that, it's going to encrypt the data on your local machine, and then it's going to look for anything that's attached. And if you have a backup on an external hard drive, guess what? It's going to go out there and encrypt that too. Now you've got no recovery at all because it's ruined both your data and your backup. Ransomware viruses will even go out and look for a connected server if you have a shared drive somewhere and try to encrypt data there as well. So ransomware, as we were mentioning last month, is on the rise. It's dangerous. I just got an invitation to a seminar from the United States government, and one of their statistics was that 50% of U.S. businesses have come in contact with ransomware in one way or the other. It doesn't mean they've all been infected, but they've either stopped it or been infected. 50% of United States businesses. It's a huge number. So if you are using a local backup like that, you are at risk. With cloud backup, generally you're getting a little bit more redundancy because most reputable providers will have redundant data centers to get your data off-site. In some cases, there's a risk transfer. If you're having another company that's monitoring your backups for you, you're putting them in charge of it. So you take that risk away from your business and put it on them. But you do have to consider bandwidth, and particularly what technology that the cloud solution is using. It may need considerable bandwidth for that to work properly. Okay, in this slide here, we've got some examples of backup medium. Of course, we've talked about the flash drive a little bit. Something to consider there is if you're using the typical drag and drop to drop files onto a flash drive, that doesn't work very well with open files. Windows Copy doesn't handle open files, and particularly open databases very well. And I want you to think Computeries there. So if you're taking your Computeries folder and sliding it onto a flash drive, you may not be getting a good backup, particularly if those files are open. Flash drives are not the most robust solution in the world. There's not really any redundancy built into them. When they fail, they fail. The next step up might be an external hard drive. You can get redundancy in those where you've got two hard drives that are mirrored together, but they don't come that way necessarily automatically. You have to know what you're purchasing and get one that's configured that way. It may just be a single hard drive and really not be much more robust than a flash drive. In general, they have higher capacity, so you'll be able to put more backups on that than you would on a flash drive to give yourself more retention. But with both of those solutions, flash drive and external hard drive, they are not acceptable in today's world. Unfortunately, the world is changing, and viruses like these ransomware viruses that attack your data, they'll defeat you if this is your method of backup. You get one of those viruses, and those devices are attached to that system, your data is going to get encrypted. Okay, in the bottom left corner, we have cloud backups. We've talked a little bit about that, and again, all cloud products are not created equal. So you really want to look at some of those things like encryption, how they're sending the data off-site, what kind of retention are you getting, how many copies are they keeping, how do you get your data back? Those are all things to look at when you're evaluating cloud solutions. Now in the center here, we have something that's called a Datto NAS device, Network Attached Storage. This is a good solution for the small business that doesn't have a server. And the way this works is it's a series of hard drives, but it's got a little more intelligence to it, where you can share out storage on that device. So your computers in the office would all connect to it. You can store your files on this particular device. But what makes this device unique is it has a built-in functionality to then send your data off to the cloud. So it's a combination of local storage and cloud storage built into one device here. So you're getting kind of the best of both worlds here. You're getting a centralized place to store your data, and you're getting that data pushed off-site for off-site storage to protect you against that site disaster. And again, that's a good solution for the small business that really doesn't have a server in place. Now this last one here, this is called a BDR, and I'm going to actually hold on to that discussion a little bit because I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail and explain what a BDR is. But let's get to how can we help you. Now we've mentioned different types of backups, file and folder level, image level, local, and cloud. We can help you with any of these and all of these. At Colin, we don't have just one solution that we're pitching. What we like to do is sit down with our customers, find out what your needs are, find out what solution makes sense. Now, obviously, if we're going to recommend something, we're going to recommend image level number 1 and something with a cloud component number 2. Those two are the preferred method of backing up. We have several file and folder level cloud backup solutions. Those are lesser cost. We've got a couple of options because not every solution is a good fit for everyone. We have one that is unlimited storage for a particular machine, which is great if all the data you want to back up is on one machine. Or we have other solutions where you pay for a block of offsite storage. Let's say you've got a small amount of data, but it's on several machines. It might be cheaper or less expensive to just buy a block of storage and back them up that way. So that's part of the evaluation process, is to take a look at your data, what you've got, what do you need backed up, what solution best fits those needs. So looking at our preferred solution, which would be an image level with a cloud component, I'm going to slide into our BDR solution. It's what we call Intelligent Business Continuity. BDR stands for Backup and Disaster Recovery, and that's a key component here. You're not only getting backup with this solution, you're getting disaster recovery as well. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here. We actually have a whole hour-long presentation just on the BDR where we demo it and show people how to use it. So I'm going to pare that down and just give you the synopsis of how it works. And the best way to do that really is to give you a visual. What a BDR is, in a nutshell, it's a computer. And that computer would sit in your office, and it would have lots of hard drive space, lots of storage space. Hard drive space is cheap today. And what you would be doing is you would be making image level backups, and again, think exact copy, of all of the servers in your office. And it's going to back up at that very low level, that 1s and 0 level. So in this slide, you might have an email server, you might have a SQL or a Computery server, you might have a web server. All of those are going to be backed up to this one singular unit. Now, where the BDR differs from other types of backups is when you have that disaster, it's what we call a backup you can use. With a traditional tape backup or even a cloud backup, you need to recover your hardware first. So let's go through an example and say your Computery server has crashed. With a tape solution or even a cloud file and folder level backup, you need to fix that hardware first. You need to call Dell or HP or whoever's handling that, get your hardware fixed, and then recover your data on top of it. So there's extended downtime while you're going through that process of getting hardware in place that can run your systems. With the BDR, since you have an exact copy of your system, you've got redundant hardware sitting right there. And you can boot up those images or those copies of your Computery server, and it will assume the role of that Computery server while the production server is down. It's got all the settings, it's got the IP address. Your end user computers aren't going to know the difference. All they know is they're connecting to a particular IP address or a particular computer name. It doesn't know that the hardware underneath it has been swapped out. So it's giving you recovery in a matter of minutes as opposed to days and weeks with a traditional backup. The BDR solution also has a cloud component to it. If you have that site disaster, fire, flood, whatever the case may be, that computer that's sitting on site is going to burn just as quickly as any of your other servers, right? So the BDR has an offsite component. It's taking those images, encrypting them, sending them over the internet to redundant data centers so that you've got those exact copies of your servers sitting in these facilities off-site. So if you do have that site disaster, you let us know. We go in and boot up your servers in these cloud environments and then give you instructions on how to access your server. Again, it's literally recovery in minutes as opposed to, in that case, it would be weeks or months if you had a site disaster like that. So if you think back to our discussion about recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives, very, very fast recovery with the BDR. It's going to meet pretty much any recovery time objective. You can be literally back up in a matter of minutes. In terms of your recovery point objective, the other beautiful thing about BDR is you don't have to just back up once a day at the end of the day. You can be backing up continuously throughout the day as frequently as every 5 minutes. Now that might be overkill for most businesses, but if you're concerned about data and you're making lots of changes throughout the day, you may want to back up fairly frequently. Maybe it's every hour or every 30 minutes. And that's part of the conversation we can have. So that recovery point objective of how far back do you have to go to get your data back, you've really reduced that time frame with a BDR solution. Okay. Regardless of what solution you decide to go with, you always want to make sure that you're doing test restores so that you have confidence that you can get your data back when you need it most. And that's a step that most businesses skip out on. In the words of our good friend here, Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. You want to verify that your backups are going to be working. And not to tout the BDR too much here, but with that solution, it does a test every single day. So at the end of the day, it picks the latest image level backup, boots it up onto that hardware, and makes sure that that server can boot up and be accessed. And we get the results of that every single night for all of our customers that are using that. So we have confidence that if one of our customers needs that solution, it's going to work. And we know because we're testing it every single day. Okay. So at this point, we hope that we've given you some good information, some options for different backup solutions, some reasons why certain backup solutions might not be all that you need. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to questions. I'm going to ask Jerry if any questions have come in through the Q&A box while we were chatting here.
I got two, Jim. First question is internet speed important? You had mentioned something about bandwidth. What role does internet speed play in backup?
It definitely plays a role with cloud backup. So it obviously doesn't if you're talking about a local backup. So with the cloud backup, it really depends on, are you doing a file and folder level backup? And that's going to work like I was saying. If you're making a change to this presentation, is it going to back up 5 megabytes worth of this presentation, or is it going to back up just the changes inside? So whatever solution you're using, they can be very, very different in how much bandwidth they're going to use. But it definitely is a consideration. If you have lots of data that's changing on a daily basis, you may need more bandwidth or faster speeds to get that data offsite on a regular basis. So I guess it's kind of a two-pronged answer here. Is it depends on the solution that you're using. It depends on how much data is changing. In general, bandwidth from ISPs seems to be going in the right direction. I know I got something in the mail. They're offering 100 meg speed internet here to my house. So bandwidth is continually improving from ISPs. So I hope that answers that.
Okay. The next question is regarding retention time. What is a good retention time? That's
another good question. I am somebody, I guess I call myself a belt and suspenders kind of guy. I don't want to have just a 2-week backup retention via tape. I want to have monthlies. I want to have annuals. I want to have ways to go back. If I have a job that 6 months after it's done, there's some kind of a problem with it, I want to have access to that data. I don't want to put myself in a situation where I don't have key information that I might need for whatever situation it could be, particularly legal situations. So in general terms, traditional tape backup, you're probably going to have a 2-week rotation, maybe do a monthly backup, something like that. With some of the other solutions like a BDR, the minimum with a BDR is a 1-year retention. You can get unlimited retention if you want. That's all a matter of cost. But essentially, you keep backups infinitum if you want with that type of solution. So for me, I'm a guy that likes more retention rather than less, but you really want to, you know, make that determination as a business, I guess.
Okay, that's what's come through the queue at this point. If anyone wants to put a chat or a question in to get their questions answered, please do so now.
Okay, just in case anyone's typing that out, I'm going to put our last slide up on the screen here, which is contact information. We've got Jim Collins' phone number there, and also Gary and our number there as well. So if there are no more questions, we just want to take a moment and thank everybody for their time and attention today. And certainly, if you want to hear more, please reach out to us, and we'll definitely be happy to help out.
And just as a reminder, our September webinar will be September 22nd, and we will be discussing managed services and more about what we do and how that helps you out. So if you have any questions, please reach out to Jim Collins or Jim LaPointe or myself, and we can make sure that you get the answers. Again, thank you very much.